Hi, I'm Matt Carpenter.
I am Peg Keough.
Welcome to college. Um, all right, Peggy. Well, before we get into the kind of very meaningful news as of late, right? Obviously, that's what we're here to talk about. But you just got back from Hawaii.
Yes, I
Um,
did.
for those of us that have never been, is it a must visit? Is it a bucket list type of destination?
Yeah, it is a bucket list. I was in Kauai, which is like the furthest island out. Beautiful, lovely. I personally like Maui better, but I'm a huge whale person and the whales love Maui. So that's a spiritual thing for me. But the islands, yeah, just visiting one of them in your life is a
Yeah.
cool thing. It's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to do it, but it's one of these things where being on the East Coast, there's just so many amazing tropical places that you have to fly over on the way there, and it's just quite a
Yep.
commitment. So
I know.
we're
Yep.
determined to do it one of these days. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's
well, growing up in Jersey, everybody went to the Caribbean, that kind of deal. Here, it was a 6 hour flight to Kauai. I mean, it's a
yeah,
serious flight from Seattle. So
yeah,
I can get to you, Carp, faster than I got to Kauai. So in
right, right.
Boston, yeah. So
Yeah, you
it's a
won't make that
serious
mistake again.
commitment for you
Yeah.
guys, even more than me. So, but yeah, huge endorsement.
Well, welcome home. Sorry we had to fly you back early, given this announcement, but that's that's duty calls. Duty
Yes, a
calls.
lot
So
happening while I was gone.
a lot happening. And to get to it, what are we talking about, right? The headline is that the Republican Party passed a bill, and I can read it in its entirety because it's not going to take too much of our time. Said bill says the Department of Education shall terminate on December 31st, 2026. So that is the headline. Now, obviously, there is just a lot to talk about with that, and that's again what we're going to unpack over the next however long we chat over this. But first, let me just talk to you just briefly about why I think we're in a decent position to talk about this and have some opinions. I would argue that our organization is kind of flown more missions in this space than maybe any organization out there, and specifically on all sides of the desk. Now, what do I mean by that? We've been through this, and I should also say, Peg, we should also remind kind of ourselves and everybody that we're just going to talk on the college piece. Obviously, Department of Education is really K through 12, and a lot more expansive than just college. We can only talk on the college stuff, right? That's where our
That's our
expertise.
sweet spot. Yep.
That's our sweet spot. But I would say, we just have a ton of experience from the student perspective, from the parent perspective, from the college financial aid office perspective, the college admissions office perspective, the enrollment offices, folks in legislature, and policymakers. So and again, just in the private sector, right? For those of us that have worked with thousands of families, kind of again being on the front lines through this process. So again, just a ton of experience and from all different vantage points. I think helps qualify us. And I will say, in terms of having some proof of concept in the not too distant past here, if we look back, because I did this, Peggy, when there was these sweeping FAFSA changes that happened a couple of years ago and they got announced right away, and we made our kind of predictions collectively and individually as a team, we almost batted 1,000. I
Yep.
mean, I think if anything, we kind of undersold what shit show it ended up being, right? But we said, okay, this is going to be a problem for families with more than one kid in college. This is going to be a problem for divorced and separated families. This is going to be a problem for business and
Business
farm owners,
owners.
right? So again, we kind of nailed it. And I share that just to say that we're going to make a lot of predictions and we don't have a crystal ball, but I think that I'll be surprised if we're dead wrong about a lot of the stuff that we're thinking here. But Peggy, let me just hear what are your knee jerks? How are you looking at this? Just kind of talk me through where your head's at.
I would say in general, all of the stuff that's happened since what was that, January 20th, whenever he was sworn in, none of it is super shocking to me. And then watching what's happened just over these last 2+ weeks, I know it feels probably to a lot of you like years because there's so much that's happened. Watch the patterns here. I mean, my talk track, my and I'm a parent that's been here, that's been in this situation. Like, try and stay level headed through this and take it in and realize you don't have control over a lot of this. But my take on this is look at what's happening here. There's a major statement made, like what they're talking about, Department of Ed being shut down, and judges get involved. We have three branches of government, for a reason. The founding fathers put that in for checks and balances. So these judges are stepping in on a lot of the stuff that's been said and said, hey, whoa, we need to look at this further. So just realize some of this, I think, is being put out there as like, I've accomplished it, it's off my list. And that's not the case. So try not to get all upset about it, because see what's happened with some of these other things that have been put forth by this current administration. Then there's a step forward, and you might think it's a negative one, but then there's a step back or a half a step back. So just keep that in mind. And the other thing I'll say is your kids are watching you. So the way you respond to this stuff, they're learning that's the way I respond to hurdles. And you want to be careful with that, because you're their role model in a lot of ways, and they're learning from you. And also it's not good for you. It's not good for you to get too upset about this. But that's my take on it. Is it shocking that they want to shut this down? No. Is it actually going to happen? Very likely no. Are things going to change? Potentially. But it's going to take some time, and we just have to see what happens. So you just have to move forward with the data you have. And this, Carp, you and I have been screaming this from the mountaintops for decades in our profession, but this just makes it even more that you have to have your shit together. You have to understand this world you're playing in, this sandbox you're playing in, financial aid, the crazy world of financial aid that I've called it for years. And lean on people if it's too much. Lean on professionals. We're here to talk to you about this. We're here to help thousands and thousands of families. But you can't just bury your head in the sand. You just can't. Like you were talking about with the FAFSA. I did this deep dive being the director of education. I was like, I got to know everything about this. And then I got to train everybody at CAP. And we did all that. We were on top of it, and we just navigated it. Like we couldn't make it better, but we navigated it. And that's what you get to do in this newest challenge that's out here with the current administration around all things college and funding and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it like I'll tell you in short, and obviously this is very fluid, right? Things are changing by the minute every day. The more that I learn, not that there's a ton of data out there, but I guess maybe the more that I think about it and sit with it, the more optimistic I am. And I'll tell you why. But to your point, we don't know what's going to happen, but there's a spectrum, right? It could be this complete blow up in the, biggest thing in the history of the college landscape since, we've had college in this country. That's one spectrum. It could be a nothing burger. It could be little to nothing, right? Now, what typically happens, the truth is somewhere in the middle. So it's very likely going to be somewhere in between those two extremes, right? But what I will say is, this is not like it's, if it ain't broke, don't fix it situation, right? We have a broken higher education system here. So change is welcome, right? Now, I worry, of course, about, making too big of decisions too quickly. And if not everybody understands kind of the downstream impacts that can result of best intentions, right? But it's like, this thing is not working for so many Americans trying to go to college in this country. So let's change, right? Let's try something. And there's this kind of theme where a lot of different, I think, parts of this process is going to be privatized. And again, there's pros and cons with that, but I think the pros can outweigh the cons. And again, we'll kind of expand on some of that. But that's kind of my quick take. Like, I just welcome change. I'm sure they're not going to bat 1,000, right? They're not going to come in here and make every decision perfectly, and that's too much to ask. But man, we got a lot to improve on. So I almost appreciate.
One thing I'll chime in that I believe 100% is Congress and all of those men and women in Congress, they want to get reelected, right? So if they're not going to want to be behind something that all their constituents are upset about. So power to the people here. It's a democracy. I think I saw I forget her name, but the rep in Arizona, Alaska, Republican. She's one of the more moderate ones. And she said, I usually get 400 calls a day. And she was getting 16. I mean, it was just so her constituents were calling, and maybe some of them were, yay, I love this. And maybe some were like, are you kidding me? But they will make decisions. That is definitively the case. It's a self-preservation. I'm sorry, but most people, that's how they're functioning. So keep that in mind too. If a lot of their constituents are saying we don't like this, then they are going to listen if they get volume on that. So just keep that in mind as this process moves forward. There might be an administration that has an agenda, but if their state is not happy about it and the voters, that's going to matter to the reps and the senators. It just is, you know.
Yep. No, agreed. So what I could do, Peggy, is I'll just kind of rattle off some bullet points that we've been talking about internally and just kind of doing some math of trying to get a sense of what could happen. And then we can, you can kind of pick these off as you see fit. But, I feel fairly certain there's going to be some type of delay on federal student loan disbursements, and probably delays on student loan forgiveness, right? There's a very manual element to this process in order for loans to actually change hands between the federal government and a specific college. You got to have individuals that are facilitating some of that process. And we are already seeing some folks leaving the Department of Education voluntarily or otherwise. And so that's something that I think is almost a foregone conclusion. Hopefully we're wrong on that. I also think, and this one may be a little bit less likely, but I would say there is some writing on the wall. Delays in PLUS loans. That's a federal government program for parents that want to borrow as opposed to students. But same deal, same challenges with the student loans. There could be delays in the timing of when that money can change hands. And then we'll go back and talk about this, but there is a world in which the PLUS loans are reduced. Currently, there's no limit to the amount you can borrow for college, or eliminated altogether.
You know what? That's a change I would be cheering from the mountaintops, because I don't like the PLUS loan. It's borderline predatory lending. I could share stories about, are you kidding me? You loan these people that much money, and it facilitates the 1.8 trillion in student loan debt we have, which is, to your point, that part of our system is broken, right? So then what you said earlier, there could be some positives here. And yeah, and just to clarify, when Matt keeps saying student loans, he's talking about the federal direct student loans. There's state loans and there's private student loans. I do that because they're always co-signed. That is different, right? But we're talking about the federal piece that the Department of Ed, or called ED, most often internally, it deals with. So just
and I do want to go back to that. I do want to go back to that because I share some of your sentiment in terms of being in complete support, and it sounds like you're in complete support of maybe getting rid of PLUS loans. But I also have some concerns around that again, I think we can have a healthy conversation around. But just to kind of round out some potential again, downstream impacts here. And speaking for myself personally, one of the things I do worry about is less oversight on Title IV requirements. Okay. Now, in order for a college to receive federal funds, they have to check a certain amount of boxes, right? And every college, in order to stay in business, needs to receive federal funds. So they have to, again, comply with these standards. And to me, this seems like oversight of these requirements seems like an obvious thing that could get overlooked, or kind of, maybe outright abandoned in some cases here, right? So I'm thinking specifically, students with disabilities. And again, I'm talking about the entire spectrum here, where even if a student struggles with dyslexia, for example, there has to be certain services that a college provides in order to help, again, students like this and any type of disability. And I just see this as a place that students could get left behind here, right? And again,
I agree. Oversight is needed. I mean, the amount of oversight is always the constant debate, but we need to have some oversight for sure.
Right, and where, a lot of these DEI programs are shrinking or going away, et cetera. I also think that, I don't know this, but some of these type programs could fall somewhere under that umbrella. So again, maybe I could just see that happening at some colleges. There just being less support, right, for these students. And then another one that's interesting, and in order to qualify, part of the Title IV requirements, colleges have to have a net price calculator, which basically, this got implemented in 2011. Families that are interested in attending a college, the concept here, which is a very good one, obviously it hasn't really worked out this way in practice or in reality, but colleges have to provide a calculator on their website that says, hey, if you get in here, here's about how much your family would actually have to pay. Now, excellent concept. In terms of the execution, not so much, right? So we would not be surprised if these net price calculators go away or get worse. And by the way, they're not in great shape to begin with. So again, this is just another thing that we could see, going by the wayside. And the last thing that I'll just say, and this is, I think, just again, speaking for myself here, and just to get back to, I don't think the sky's falling here. There's some immediate concern that Pell Grants are going to go away. That's free money for families that are essentially poverty level and below, or that federal direct student loans are going to go away altogether, which again is a very important resource, especially for those families that need it most and for students that have to get themselves through college. We have zero reason to believe that these programs are going to go away, right? So I think there's going to be some administrative headaches in terms of facilitation, but they're not going to go away. I don't think anybody, is intending for that to happen.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I agree from what I've heard and read. Yeah, I don't think the subsidized version, who knows how that's going to play out with the loans, but yeah, I don't think
you
they're.
just talk about that, Peggy, for folks that are hearing that word
Yeah,
for the
so
first time.
these federal direct student loans that we're talking about, basically they're awarded to the student. All the student needs to do is submit the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. There's two different versions. There's a subsidized version, which means the government pays the interest until 6 months after graduation if you have need-based aid eligibility. Then there's another version that's unsubsidized, and I tell families all the time, like Bill Gates's kids can get unsubsidized federal student loans if they submit the FAFSA. The interest just starts accruing. So the subsidized is obviously a no-brainer, right? And if you have the need, you might as well take them. That's $19,000 over 4 years, so it's not going to pay most bills, but every little bit helps. But that's what I'm talking about. Is that something the government is obviously funding there? So could that go away? Maybe. I don't see that right away. There is some, like I said earlier, everybody wants to get reelected, and that's hurting a lot of Americans. And if you use your voice and let your reps know, like, we don't want this. This is part of how we're helping our child go to college. Power in numbers and volume, like I said, be vocal, follow along with us, follow along with what's going on so that you can reach out to your representatives and let them know, I know what's going on. Don't get rid of the subsidized loans. Don't get rid of the Pell Grant. I agree with you, Matt. I think the Pell, they've increased it with the new FAFSA and it's on trajectory to keep going up. I don't see that being a big push to get rid of that.
Yeah, same. So again,
Yeah.
I think people that are really concerned about that can just kind of, let that go. That's not in play. And believe me, if it is, you will hear from us right away, and you'll hear from us very loudly. So, Peg, I want to go back because just you gave us a few hints, obviously, but just talk to me about why you want the plus loan to go away.
Well, for our listeners, I'm a financial planner by background. That's how I roll basically. And I've just seen the way that, and I call it the Parent Plus loan still because that's what it used to be called. So it makes it clear it's a parent loan. Your child is not involved at all. But what colleges are allowed to do, and they do it all the time, and I'm not being critical, they're allowed to, is whatever they cost minus whatever your child gets from the college, merit aid, need-based aid, what have you. They can roll in and say, well, don't worry, the rest is paid for. $40,000 of a Parent Plus loan. And people look at it and say, well, okay, I can make my child's dreams come true. And I know it's loans. And sometimes people don't even realize it's loans when they're looking at it because it says zero cost.
Yeah.
And then they sign the line. And I think that allows people to make really bad decisions, one. And two, I am shocked at how easy it is to get a Parent Plus loan. And that's where a lot of people turn, that maybe their credit score is not awesome. And it's like, oh, well, I'm getting terrible rates in the private world, but the government will give it to me. I mean, I'll just tell you one story. The dad made $40,000, and I wanted them to apply because if you get rejected, then the child can get more, the student get more direct student loans. And they approved the dad for 28,000 for 1 year of loans when he makes 40. So that's predatory lending. I'm sorry. And the interest rate is super high, and they charge you 4.25 of an origination fee just to have the privilege to have it. So they're kicking you in the butt on the way out. Like it just, and I know, and you can share, I know what you're going to say, buddy. I know what you're going to say, why you like it, but it just, I feel like most people use it when they should be saying, hey, Johnny, or hey, Susie, this school is not affordable because this is our only option, and we're going to bury ourselves in debt. And it allows them to not have that conversation, which again, for me as a planner, that's a whole nother podcast discussion about how we handle money and talk to our kids about it. But that's, I know there's a few instances where people use it prudently, potentially, but I think most of the time it's not. And it's hurting families and parents big time.
Yeah, so look, I will weigh in with my devil's advocate point of view in a second here, but before I do that, let me kick the plus loan while it's down here, if you haven't buried it already. But it also, I think, it is one of the biggest variables to blame in terms of our skyrocketing costs of college, the cost of attendance, because it encourages these colleges to say, look, no matter how much you raise your prices, these families will be approved for a plus loan, and there is no, this well will not go dry, right? And again,
Yep.
and there is no limit to how much we will allow them to borrow, and we don't care if they're employed at all. That person, that person got approved with a $40,000 income. I've seen many people get approved with a zero income,
Yeah, so
being
is that
completely unemployed.
predatory lending or what? And it's our government.
Totally.
Like it's not,
Yeah.
and I 100% agree with you because they know we'll just put it on that award letter. And if this kid wants to come here so badly, and there's certain schools that we all know that will move heaven and earth to go to, and that's a whole nother conversation. And
Yeah.
they're just laughing all the way to the bank. These colleges, they literally are. And we're talking about you can't control what Department of Ed does, da da da. You can control this. You can make decisions about how you spend your money and what loans you take. The colleges are not in the driver's seat. But anyways, I'll let you take over again. Sorry.
Not at all. Just last thing
Yeah.
again, to your point, it is the only loan that colleges can recommend. So, so many, Peg said this, but just to kind of double down on that point, because it's an important one. A lot of these colleges, when they say, hey, you need to borrow X amount of dollars, they say, do it with this. And parents just assume that's their only option, or this is what the college told me to do. And you can't blame them for kind of going that route and not, doing homework, because they're in a lot of ways, as far as they know, they're following instructions.
Yeah,
Um,
it's on the award letter, and it's like, okay, this is how I make it work. Where do I sign?
right.
And that's what's happening en masse, and it's just really unfortunate, you know.
Well, I'll tell you why I am some of the reasons I do like the plus loan. Number one, and again, you can make an argument against this, and I know what yours is, Peggy, but just for some families, it is the only loan they can qualify for, right? They want to send their kids to college. They get denied by the private sector. They get denied by the state, and they need to borrow money. They don't have another option besides a plus loan. It's the easiest one to qualify for. So for some families, it makes college possible. For some colleges. But that's again, I'm not going to stand tall on that one. But for some families, where I do think this makes sense, they have by far the most flexible repayment terms. They have the longest repayment options. Right now, of course, that means you're paying a boatload when we look at the gross amount and we add up the compounding interest. But again, it gives that flexibility factor. And then for some families, there are forgiveness programs. If you are in civil service, if you're a teacher, if you're a nurse, if you're a firefighter, right? There's some forgiveness programs that the plus loan can offer that the private sector cannot. And the last thing, and this is a different podcast, I won't expand upon it here, Peggy, but there is a way if you have a certain variables in your family's dynamic, you can almost use this loan to beat the system. And again, I'll just kind of tease that for another episode, Peggy. We won't unpack that today, but I will say that possibility exists, and it's a real thing in a way that you can't do. You can't get that creative with other loan options.
Yeah. I
Now,
mean, and all this loan forgiveness, you kick this off talking about, that's on the table. So everything you do, I mean, legally, I'm not a lawyer, but I'll act like I am for 2 seconds. To me, if you sign something, the entity you sign it with should stand behind it. But you want to remember this is the federal government and they've got a shitload of resources, right? You're not going to be able to fight the federal government. So that's something to think about too. And loan forgiveness through many administrations has not been easy. I mean, you really have to have a lot of fortitude to keep pushing through on loan forgiveness because it's not like you just sign and then they magically do everything that they were supposed to do. I mean, people have fought and fought and fought to get through that process too with other administrations.
So I want to read you a quote here, Peggy, and this is from Betsy DeVos. I don't know if you've seen this or not. So she was the Secretary of Education. She wrote kind of an op-ed in response to this announcement, basically fully in support of it. I'd be hard pressed to find any dissenting opinions here, but I really latched on to these next couple of sentences. I want to get your reactions, and I have some of my own here. But she says, put the student loan program in the hands of bankers, not education bureaucrats, ideally at actual financial institutions or at a minimum under the purview of the Department of Treasury. The private sector in particular can offer better rates, terms, and quality than the federal government has proven capable of doing. This would also serve to curb runaway tuition increases, which have been fueled in no small part by the perception of quote unquote free government money. Did you get all that, Peggy?
I got it. And I agree that there's definite room for improvement. The private sector has a whole nother set of issues. These guys are out to make money. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that negatively. They're not like I always tell parents, the direct federal loans, the government's encouraging kids to go off and get more education. That's truly what that program is. The Parent Plus loan and whatever. You can argue whatever there. But it's not the perfect solution, in my opinion, that Betsy's spouting here. Absolutely not. There's a whole bunch of issues that come from moving anything over to the private sector. I mean, and we were just talking about oversight. You take away oversight, they're going to be off to the races. And you could see a scenario where people are making it happen for their child and they're taking out, credit card interest rate levels with really crappy terms because the private sector's own this now and they're out to make a buck off of the consumer. So it's a nice thing to say, but I could see if you catastrophize that could be really, really bad for families. Much worse than the Parent Plus loan that I am obviously not a fan of.
Right. So I think it's really interesting to me, and I'm kind of intrigued by how much momentum goes into. I think she's talking specifically about loans, but kind of in the spirit of what she's saying here of like, hey, let's get the private sector involved, which is a lot. I think again is I'm okay with that theme. Like let's let the best, let's let the best kind of win out here. However, I think you are going to let a few more wolves in the hen house or whatever that saying is. And again, on the optimistic side, it's like, hey, let these lenders compete with one another, and the consumers are going to benefit, and and ultimately win, right? Because there's all this competition in the private sector. My big concern here, especially with getting rid of the plus loan, is that I think one purpose that the plus loan can serve, even though the interest rates are insanely high at the moment, I think the private sector is somewhat tethered to that. And my concern is if it goes away, now the private sector may kind of look at each other and maybe maybe the old boys clubs gives each other a couple winks and they say, guess what? Let's make the minimum interest rates whatever, right? And because we don't have to worry about competing with the plus loan. So I think you're going to make an argument to that going either way, and I just kind of have my fingers crossed and I'm cautiously optimistic that it would work out the way that we would hope for consumers. But the other thing I will say here, and again, just in terms of this concept of allowing families to have access to the best solutions, something that we fight against all the time is that high schools will say, man, we love you guys. You guys are the best. We need all the financial aid and scholarship help and education and tools and resources we can possibly get, but we're only allowed to work with uh, nonprofit institutions. Okay. As opposed to, I want to give my parents and the students the best possible solutions, whoever that is. Who cares? I just want the best resources for my families. And that spirit I can get behind, right? Of
Yeah.
let the best, again, let the kind of best solutions for the consumers rise to the top, whoever that is. So I hope some of that sentiment kind of creeps into some of the hurdles that we unnecessarily fight in our space.
Yeah, it's that somehow we're dirty or something because we're a for profit. So I agree, and as I'm listening to you, because I openly listen, I do get that like the plus loan, the parent plus loan, it's out there, and the privates know. Well, if we go out of control here, that's always there. We know it's easy to get. It just needs to be, if you're gonna have the current setup, there has to be guardrails on how they're doing it and who and right now there just doesn't seem to be any guardrails. Just anybody can get it. And that's the biggest issue. But Carp, we've seen this over and over again where one of our families says, I have a great credit score and 800 and they're
Yeah.
offering me 12% interest rate. So the private sector isn't perfect either. It's not like, oh, you've got a great credit score, you're getting a sweet deal on interest. And if that's the only game in town, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this goes. But yeah, just abolishing it, I think they'll move it. They won't abolish it like
Yeah.
USAID. They're moving it under the Treasury
Right.
Department, right or wrong. They'll do something like that. But there is a lot of waste in our government, tons of waste. And so some of this is like, all right, makes sense. But they need to bring people in that understand everything that ED does, because there's a lot of moving pieces, and if you just do this, get rid of this, get rid of that, fire, 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 it's a mess, right? You've got
Right.
people doing really good, impactful work as a government worker, and all of a sudden they don't have access and they're
Right.
stuck. And then all of us are stuck. We're stuck helping all of you guys, and you guys are stuck trying to send your kid to college. So hopefully this is not the first thing that this administration has tried to do. Maybe they'll start seeing what's a better way for us to try and affect the change we want. So we'll see. We'll see
So
if their approach changes to trying to do this stuff.
So obviously we're largely speculating here, right? I mean, we're all kind of learning in real time, and things are going to play out how they're going to play out. The time will tell where we were right, where we were wrong. But in any event, what's actionable for parents, for students, for educators? Like, if you're coaching up a classroom right now, and what are you advising, right? What should we be doing or not be doing as a I guess a family specifically getting ready to tackle this process and send their kids off to college.
So you're asking me. Okay.
Yeah.
As I've always said for decades in this space, you need to understand how this works, right? That's the first thing. And if it's overwhelming and you don't understand it and you're not a numbers person, then get help, just like you do with other things in your life, right? But it's vital, because if you, what I call, drift through this, and this has been true since I started doing this work, you are screwing yourself. Like, there's so much money to be had. There's so many great colleges. There's so many great options for your children, not just one school. I will say that to this whole audience 100%. But you got to understand it. If you just drift along, your child is likely not going to have the best outcome for when they start their next chapter. You're likely not going to have the best financial outcome as parents or guardians, and your child isn't going to have the best financial ending because they're going to be buried in whatever amount of debt, co-signed and direct student loans. And believe me, like, we all get it. Like, starting life with six-figure debt, you can't start. Like, it's overwhelming, and nothing is constant in life, right? The computer engineers that were getting out making megabucks, all of a sudden sudden they're all getting laid off and it's hard for them to find jobs. Like nothing is a constant. So, again, I'm a planner and I probably need to plan a little less than I do. That's my thing to deal with, but you can own that part. You can understand that part and get the help you need to do it. It'll relieve your stress some, and then vis-a-vis, it'll do it for your kids and your whole family life and the whole bit. And I say that from speaking from experience. I have twins, and of course I inherently did that because that's my thing. It wasn't my husband's thing, and he did parts of this that weren't my thing, and we just kind of owned it. But you don't have to. You don't have to. That's why I exist. That's why Matt exists. Because we saw this and we were like, holy moly, this is something people need. And as these things happen that we're talking about today, they need it more. You guys need it more and more. So
Well,
just,
and also, so I mean, we shared, very similar philosophy around this and kind of what the takeaways are. But another reason why I am, again, kind of cautiously optimistic here is because I'm hoping this is another just data point that can get more students, specifically more parents, right, more families to just take accountability, right, and have some agency in this process, right? Because so many people say, well, there's nothing we can do, right? It's just palms up, hands in the air. College is so expensive and student loan rates are out of control. And and it's the government and it's the colleges and it's Wall Street. And guess what? They all do have some onus in our problem here. There's no doubt about it, those three entities. But guess who else does? The consumers, those of us that are going to college and sending their kids to college. We're the ones that chose to go to the college. We're the ones that signed a promissory note promising to pay that money back, right? I'm just hoping that we can just kind of take this as another maybe wake up call to say, oh, wait a second, colleges are $100,000 a year. Wait a second, the federal government loan is basically 10% if I need to borrow. Wait a second, they're getting rid of the Department of Education. I better start paying attention here, right? Because nobody's really coming to the rescue. I have to take accountability myself. I don't get to just say, we'll figure it out, because we all know how that ends. And it ends in $1 trillion in debt, right? So to me, that's a good thing. Take accountability, get involved, pay attention. We're all over this. We this is our passion, truly. Again, so just don't put your head back in the sand and just continue to stay engaged, and you're going to have a successful end result if you do that.
yeah, 100% agree. Yeah. I know it's hard to think about when you have a busy life and you have so much going on, and it's a whole new thing for some people. And you might be like I have clients that are like sculptures and artists, and they're like, numbers? I can't even do this. But it's just, as I like to say, you get to do this. You don't have to. You get
Right.
to. It's a mindset shift, right? And it's too costly not to have your head in the game in some capacity. It just is. Without everything we were talking about today, it just is. And you want the best outcome for your child, which doesn't necessarily mean it's the school that they love. That might not be the best outcome. That's another episode where we talk all about that. Oh, is college worth what they're charging? That's a whole nother discussion.
Very true. So I guess we should say, Peggy, like us, follow us, download us, do
Please, yes,
whatever
yes.
you do with
Download, like,
podcasts,
share,
share, and
repost, all that fun stuff.
yeah, we're gonna do our very best to stay in a weekly cadence, and then sometimes we'll kind of, as there's big announcements, we'll kind of bust in with emergency episodes type of deal, which I guess today might categorize as one of those. But we appreciate you. Keep paying attention, Peggy. Welcome back to the mainland, and we will see you soon.
All right. Bye, everybody.